Good evening, everyone. I'm Carolyn Sullivan. Thank you so much. Usually I have to do more to earn it than that. I'm Carolyn Sullivan, and I'm the president and CEO of New Chapter Coaching. We're a full-service nonprofit consultancy, and I was asked to come here tonight to talk about the state of the nonprofit sector. Hopefully, Lawrence or some others talked with you about this topic, but before I start with my remarks, I want you to stand up as you're able if you are an employee of, on the board of directors of, receiving services from, have some direct connection to a nonprofit here in Boone County. Stand up. Yep. So many of us are working with or relying upon nonprofits in our community, and the impact is incalculable, but we're working on figuring out that economic and human impact. So I'm here to urge my Congressman Alford, who's a little stiff tonight, and the other members of Congress to stop the dangerous trend of cutting funding to nonprofit programs. Especially when there is no evidence of waste, fraud, or abuse. These cuts may look like numbers on a budget, or a financial, sheet, but on the ground, they translate to human carnage. They translate to impact on real humans. They look like fewer meals for seniors, fewer beds for unhoused humans, fewer mental health crises for those in need, fewer opportunities for our children to experience the arts and adults in here, or thrive in after-school programs, and so on, and so on, and so on. There's no one in this room who hasn't been directly impacted and helped by a nonprofit in our community, right? Our churches are nonprofits. Nonprofits are not wasteful. As a nonprofit consultant working in this community for the past 17 years, I've seen firsthand how nonprofit organizations are often the most efficient and effective stewards of public dollars. Yes. They are asked, and they constantly are doing more with less. And when funding is slashed without justification, without explanation, it's the most vulnerable among us who often pay the highest price. Not because programs are failing, but because politics is standing in the way of compassion, common sense, and long-term thinking. We must look beyond the individual programs being cut and understand the interconnected systems these nonprofits operate within. For example, if Medicaid is gutted, which it's headed to that end result, we're not just talking about reduced access to health care for low-income folks and people with disabilities and pregnant women. We're also talking about more people turning to nonprofits in times of crisis. With untreated chronic conditions and unmanaged mental health issues and higher emergency visits and so on. There's a cascading effect and a cascading impact that we will all see and we will all feel. And who will respond to that rising impact? The same nonprofits already facing historic demand for their services, staff burnout, and funding insecurity. Without Medicaid, organizations like Woodhaven, who serve people with disabilities, True North, who serve domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, and our community health partners will face an unsustainable burden while the root issues go unaddressed. Cuts in one area trigger cascading effects in others. Less access to health care leads to worse outcomes in housing, employment, education, and so on. These nonprofits are operating in a system. Less support for crime victims leads to increased trauma and long-term costs to public safety. And I know many of us in this community are concerned about crime or the perception of rising crime. That's not going to be made better by cuts to nonprofit programs. Cutting arts and culture programs weaknesses community resilience and economic vitality. This is not theory, folks. It is already happening. I was at a meeting this afternoon from 2 to 3:30 listening to nonprofits talk about the very real impact that these cuts from Washington and, let's be real, Jeff City are having on our nonprofit and the safety net that many of us and our neighbors rely upon. Millions of dollars in federal funding have already been lost by nonprofits right here in Columbia. Ragtag Film Festival, but I better be able to say it, I'm on the board. Ragtag Film Society, I just came from a board meeting. They've lost $30,000 in funding. Central and Northeast Missouri Food Bank, they've lost funding because of the cuts to the USDA. So the food system is being eroded. Missouri Symphony, NEA grant. And Local Motion, a $500,000 grant. Missouri Immunization Coalition, over $1 million grant. And so on. This is just to name a few, folks. I could go on, and I won't. These cuts are not isolated incidents, and this is not an exhaustive list. These cuts are part of a pattern, one that hollows out our public services and weakens our safety net and erodes our nonprofit organizations that hold our communities together. We rely on them, they rely on us. We must answer the calls that they put out because these members of Congress are not answering the calls. If there's credible evidence that a program isn't working, let's address it with transparency and accountability. But we cannot continue to justify Representative Alford and others. We cannot continue to justify devastating broad cuts based on vague accusations or political ideology. In Columbia, we know these programs work. The funders know these programs work. These nonprofits have to go jump through hoop after hoop after hoop to get this funding. These funders put them through the test to get funding. Congress doesn't have to worry about waste, fraud, and abuse. So I urge you, Congressman Alford and the rest of the gang, especially the Republican leadership, to stop the cuts. Restore what has been lost. Protect the programs that protect Missourians, because when one part of the system fails, the pressure lands somewhere else, and it always ends up hurting the people who need it the most. We're watching you, and we're counting on you to do the right thing. Otherwise, we will do the right thing come November of 2026.